thank you again, Maya. You and I are giggling a little bit because we've. So this is between us. We've been here before, but it's fantastic to have you on the show and to talk about yourself and what you're doing and this, I guess, call to the universe that you've put out to really do something in the
Yeah.
healthcare sector. You and I met a little while back, and I remember you're very passionate about this, and you're kind of this warrior that I see that wants to make this huge change in this sector. And yeah, talk to us a little bit about that and what you want to do, and especially with AI, the tools that
Yeah.
we have currently. Yeah, tell
For
us.
me, healthcare is this really traditional model. And one of the things that's really the kind of core dilemma for healthcare is that it's what I describe as one of the really kind of legacy models of industry. And one of the dilemmas with it is that it's really
Mm,
difficult to get adoption through it of new technology in particular. And it's one of the reasons is that we're really risk adverse because it's such a high risk game, healthcare, and we need to really think about governance and all the processes around it. And we don't have a lot of dollars in the system, and there's a lot of competing needs for those dollars, and often understandably, we want those dollars spent in frontline services, so with the people, because, we need people to run the
yeah.
services. And so then it's really hard to spend those dollars on the systems and the processes. And so a lot of, I guess, the tension points then become, well, how do we adopt change in the system when we have those tension points of minimal amounts of dollars to spend? And I'm someone who's a really big systems thinker. And so for me, I kind of think about, well,
Mm,
you can't just, and we know from an operations perspective, which is also my background, that you can't just keep putting more people into the system, because also the dilemma is that people are amazingly valuable. I'm a clinician by background, so I very much believe in the peoples, and also I believe in the non-clinical people because they're the people who keep our hospitals and our health ecosystem going, but they're also the biggest cost burden to the operating dollars in the system. So we can't just keep putting more people into the system. So we've got to be smarter. And so there's that adage, work smarter, not harder. And so for me, one of the reasons
mm,
that, I'm obsessed with technology and design and art in general. And so for me, really, when I think about, well, how do we start to think differently? I think about, well, what are the technology options? And I've been someone who's really enjoyed embedding technology and process change and improvement into my kind of service design, forever. Even my first interaction with that was actually when I was doing my my final placement as a social work student. Anyway, so for me, I kind of fundamentally believe that AI is going to be the turning point for us in the healthcare ecosystem. And ultimately,
mm.
I'm not going to say I'm an evangelist in the space because, I'm very clear that there's a lot of dilemmas on the flip side of AI. But fundamentally, I do believe that AI is going to be the thing that makes our healthcare system sustainable when we've got all these really significant tension points in the system at the moment.
Yeah. And that's interesting because AI is, it's a
Yeah.
fantastic, powerful tool. I think it's a little bit misunderstood
Yeah.
at the moment, and in terms of the difference between AI and
Correct.
really good automation. I think a lot of the use cases at the moment are around really good automation, which I think lends to great use cases,
Yeah.
right, in any sector, in particular in healthcare. But we don't want AI in its truest definition. We don't want AI
Yeah.
making decisions, medical decisions, clinical decisions
Yeah.
at the moment
I'll give you a
yet,
really good
right?
example of that. And I actually was speaking to a few people this week in some workshops I was a part of about this point. So one of the things that we need to be really clear about is the where and what are we using what for, and making sure we're
Mm,
adopting the right use cases and the right tools for those use cases. So in one of my previous lives, I designed and deployed clearly with technical people. They did the back end stuff. But, I had this operational problem around some revenue issues. And so I kind of understood that we couldn't, again, what I just described, just have more humans on the ground. We didn't have more EFT for it. So I came up with a technology solution. So what I came up with was a robotic automation process. And so I designed and deployed, alongside our technical team, a robotic automation process that essentially stopped and looked for revenue leakage that was happening, and we mitigated this revenue leakage through a robotic automation process that essentially was looking at conditions of hospital kind of admission and discharge processes, that was a kind of a reasonable spend at the upfront, but we made back that ROI in the first kind of probably 3 months of the automation, and we would have been losing really, significant amounts of money. I won't go into the details. And so that's a really good example of what you describe of kind of a robotic automation process, of what you describe as an automation process that didn't need to be an AI. So when I think about that use case, how I kind of came up with that was I'd been already thinking for years before about how AI could look at coding of medical information to look at other kind of use cases of where we could understand other opportunities, right? So we were never going to get at that point, one, because it wasn't around in that point, AIs into our system. We had paper-based medical records. We didn't have digital ones. So, in that sense, it wasn't going to work, right? So I kind of go, that's still an automation process. We still got a really good outcome from it, but it wasn't the right use case for AI because we didn't have the enablement in the back end. Then to your point about when and what do we choose, I was listening to a podcast this week actually, and Yuval Harari was talking about, this idea of taking a pause with the AI stuff, right? And that just because we have the technology, do we need to use it? And if we are going to use it, we really need to think about the meaningfulness of the use cases. And that really resonated for me because I think the other thing is, especially in what I describe as this legacy ecosystem, mostly, in the traditional models of healthcare, not in the entrepreneurial spaces, because I work a lot in that as well with, the up and coming tech space of healthcare as well. But in the more traditional areas, the legacy models and the kind of IT systems don't necessarily have the ability right here, right now, in this moment, to just deploy the AIs, right? So in that case, we go, well, where can we then look for these opportunities to embed pilot opportunities for AI, right? And to your point about the clinical decision making, I gave a talk recently to a few of the big public hospitals around what's the opportunity for AI in allied healthcare, right? And I think that one of the examples I gave is that, AI can be utilised really well for evidence-based care. So where can we use AI, for instance, to, for treatment planning? So there's really good evidence around that. And that's because AI is really good with kind of reading really big data sets and understanding, conditions around that and, both conditional rules and also massive data sets to go, well, based on this kind of patient profile and this kind of massive data set of things, how do we match and come up with the most likely good outcomes? And, I said to the room, I can see you all getting a little bit, uncomfortable with that idea, because I think people go, well, the robots are taking over.
Yeah.
And I said to them, and I gave them this analogy, and I said, guys, it's no different to you going to a more senior clinician and saying, I'm just having a little bit of a tough time with this patient kind of presentation. Can we have a talk about it? Because I'd really like a second opinion. And we do this all the time in our clinical practice, right? And we always do that. And we're taught to do that through our clinical training. And so what I suggested to them is you've got to start to conceptualize AI as adjunct to our clinical practice. It's not there to take over. Clinical decision making always has your decision at the end and absolutely your sign off and your designation at the end, right? You're in charge of it. So it should be there to help you and to help modulate your decision making. It shouldn't be there to do it on your behalf. And I think then there was a bit of a, okay, maybe we can imagine that. and it's not about a distrust or a people not wanting to, it's that fear factor of the unknown. And one of the things I speak to when I'm doing
Yeah.
AI adoption talks or, strategy work with people is that thing of going, this is about taking people on a journey of understanding, right? Because in the same way that when we went from, and I was joking with people the other day, from Blackberries with, tactile phone functioning and tapping on the keyboards to our smartphones, we had to kind of go, but what's it going to be like to tap on a flat screen? We didn't quite understand it, but Steve Jobs and Johnny, if I'm very bad with pronouncing his surname, sorry, they understood that they had to, show a representation of the design features. I think it's called anthropomorphic design, to be able to take us on that journey, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same when I describe those processes in healthcare or other industries about taking people on the narration of the story of AI. So I think that, these are really great opportunities for us to really take healthcare on this design journey, but we have to take really meaningful, low risk, high value use cases.
Yeah. We'll be right back after this short break. The common theme that I've learnt with having the guests on this podcast is you can't take the human out
Yeah.
of any of this. There's this notion that this technology is just going to replace everything and everyone, but all of the industry leaders and experts that I've been talking to, no, they're saying it is, like
Yeah.
you said, it's an adjunct to our human decision making. You still need to have the human
Yeah.
component into it. With this sector that you're in, I did a little bit of work on it a few years ago, and I must say it is a bit difficult. It is a very heavily regulated sector. Government controls and rules and around
Yeah.
the Royal Commission and everything, and it was
Yeah.
really hard to break into, and we had to kind of leave it
Yeah.
for now. Hopefully, we can come back to it, just because of those very high entry. And do you see that as a continuing
Yeah.
obstacle for technology companies to come in, especially small one? The big ones, yes, they've got the money and the resources to throw at it
Yeah.
to get into this space, right? But for smaller
Yeah.
companies like myself
I
and
think
that
it's a
sort of
really
thing, it is
great
very
question, and
difficult.
it's really funny because I think that this is like it's a healthcare thing and it's a non-healthcare thing, because I was chatting with someone else in the industry in
Yeah,
construction yesterday, and talking to them about AI adoption for they're a multinational, and they were saying, oh, the thing about adoption of AI in construction is we're really heavily regulated, right? And literally said word for word to me,
yeah,
and I said
yeah.
to him, I said, oh, it's really interesting. I said, because, I would suggest that, I come from a healthcare background and we're pretty heavily regulated as well. So I kind of understand your context. So I think this is a lived experience of lots of
Yeah,
industry, right? Because, finance is also really heavily regulated and da. So, I 100% take your point. But I think that what we understand about that is that it just means that we actually understand that these are safeguards and guardrails, right? And what we also understand about AI and AI adoption is that guardrails is going to be core to the success of its adoption. So I actually think that for when we talk about narration and storytelling and how to kind of strategically enter business, and this is why, this is the other part of my kind of consulting world, is actually that's your kind of business, entry point, right? Is to actually say, my core value proposition to you as an AI expert, especially in kind of your business, Tony, is I understand guardrails. I'm the AI expert, so that's what I
yeah,
can offer you, because I
yeah.
understand how important governance is. I understand how important kind of regulatory structures are. Therefore, that's our commonality, right? So I think that's a real great entry point for people who are the AI experts. We're coming in to teach other industries that, right? Because that's an overlap. Whether it is that you're the specialist in healthcare regulations, that actually doesn't matter. You can let them be in charge of that, right? So I think that's kind of the interesting thing. I also think that the other opportunity is where you think about kind of partnerships in terms of going in with the smaller players, so to speak. So it's not about the smaller providers and hospital providers, because I think, there's an opportunity for everyone. But I think that whether or not it's about kind of going in with the smaller players underneath. So, whether or not it's the people like me who kind of are well within the ecosystem, as an example, but aren't the kind of, big brand names kind of thing that are interacting in the ecosystem. So I think often there are so many of us that are kind of within health that we just kind of have to think about it really
Yep.
differently. And I give this talk when I, go out into industry, where I talk about that it's really important to kind of know your market stall, but know the marketplace. And I think this is how we kind of build
Right.
ecosystems and how we're able to kind of both lean into each other and, be strategic, but also how we're able to be force multipliers. And I think that, to your point about will
Yep.
it ever change, I think that all of us don't want it to change in real terms, right? So I think the business part of us wants it to change because we want easier entry points. And for me, it's the same in the opposite way, right? I'm a
Yep.
consultant, so I want more business, right? So I want the rest of the industry to make it easier for me to enter into, right? But I think
Yeah.
ultimately
Yeah.
none of us want it to
Yeah.
change, because this is how safeguards work, and that's really important for all of us. We're all consumers of the healthcare system, and these are really, really important guardrails that keep us all safe and keep our healthcare being delivered at a really high quality rate, and we're the consumers of that. So it's there for a reason. In the same way that we're all trying to
Yeah.
understand in the AI world, and as people who are both, your products as well, developing AI, we want to understand and we want to ensure that it's delivered in a high quality, safe way. So I think that that's why I kind of describe that these are things that are there and in a really important way in terms of governance and data privacy and all of those things. But what we need to work out is what
Yeah.
is it that we're
Yeah.
experts of, and therefore we offer each other really great value propositions when we come together in partnership journeys.
So tell us a little bit about dialectical consulting. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I've actually never
dialectics,
heard of that word. Or is it? Yeah,
a thing.
dialectics. Is that a
Yeah, so
health thing?
dialectics
Yeah.
is a health thing, but it comes well before health. It's a philosophical
Yep.
kind of being, or I guess branch of schooling, where it's actually around
Yeah.
kind of this idea that we can have two different philosophical kind of ideas or stances that are opposing views, that are contradictory views, that can hold the same truth and power. So this idea that you can have opposing views that are equally weighted but that oppose each other. In the health context, it's
Right.
a type of psychotherapy that we use in kind of mental health and psychiatry, dialectical behavioural therapy. And one of the reasons that I chose it and decided to kind of use it for my consulting business is that for me, dialectics is this idea of opposing views, and opposing views, and that tension point is actually the grey that one I feel most comfortable in, because that is where the best work kind of happens, right? Which is the tension points we've spoken to
Mm.
already, right? Which is that you have these different things going on. And for me, I've always worked in the grey of things, right? Which is that I kind of view that
Yep.
often we're caught as both humans in our personal lives, in our professional lives, and in our careers, in the kind of space between things that we understand as opposing. And I kind of view that transformation and innovation happens in that space between kind of often opposing truths. And so I kind of felt that's probably me. Well, it's definitely me at my most comfortable. I love being in the unknown. I'm good in chaos because I'm an
Mm.
ops
Mm.
person. I'm a problem solver and natural. But I love the transformation space. And I kind of ultimately believe that right in the middle, kind of it's like where the Venn diagram is, right? In the middle of these kind of opposing
Yeah. Yeah.
worldviews is actually where I think the most interesting transformation and innovation happens. And I wanted to kind of place myself in the center of that and hopefully be able to deliver for other people in the community impact in that space. So that's where the name comes from. And, I pay homage to
Yeah.
both the kind of philosophical political movements that come out of dialectics and also to the clinicians and the people with lived experience who are trying to navigate what that means to them in terms of their worlds. So yes, that's kind of dialectics.
And you started this a little while ago. I know you came from um, the.
Yeah.
I think you were at a hospital
Yep.
at Worth for a little while, and yeah, you've worked with a lot of big companies in this space. So you've decided now to go out on your own. I've been where you were about 7 years ago, so
Yeah.
I know what you're going through. So if you need any
Yeah,
advice in that space, just tell me. But yeah, what are
yeah.
you looking to do
Great
now
question.
with this company?
Yeah, listen, it's really interesting for me because, my last job, yeah, I was director of strategy and operations across 4 hospitals. And that was, I was there for just under about 9 years. So it was, and, I've always worked in hospital or community based settings in not for profit and public hospitals, and then
Mm,
private and private not for profit, and a little stint in fashion before that and BDM. So, yeah, correct.
can tell.
Yeah. So listen, I think that for me, it was that opportunity. I've always had beautiful feedback. I've been really lucky in my career to have people who have been really supportive of me, and who often have seen things in myself that I haven't necessarily seen in myself at the time. But I also grew up in a household
Mm,
of parents who were who kind of said, you can kind of achieve whatever you want to achieve, just go for it. And I don't have that type A
yeah.
personality of the kind of perfectionist. So I'm always willing to just give it a go because I don't really care about failure. So I think that's a real lucky kind of
Mm,
characteristic, right? So yeah,
it's
and
a great
also like
attitude.
so
Yeah.
it's and I balance that also kind of with that thing of like you may as well try it because if it doesn't work out, it is what it is. Anyway, so when I decided to kind of end my time at my previous job, what I wanted to do was really I decided because I'm really a systems thinker, and I've always wanted to work at a systems level of change, right? And I'd really felt that
Mm,
I'd especially coming through COVID, which was one of and this is probably an odd way to phrase it, but I was really lucky during COVID, and my life didn't look that different, right? I went into the office every day. I'm one of the only people who didn't do work.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't
Critical
do work from
service. Yeah.
home. I was lucky. The overwhelming majority of my friends lived within my 5 kilometre radius, and so work life looked kind of and life looked pretty similar for me. But you know, that was one of the great learning curves of my professional life. And being part of the public-private partnerships and all of that stuff, and so I really got to kind of do another layer of kind of professional work and learning. And coming out of that, I really decided, now's the time to kind of take that next step and to really be able to kind of look at how I can help impact more than just the 4 walls I'd been in for the 9 years. And to the credit of my old
Mm,
job,
mm.
that will be forever the best organisation I ever worked for. They supported me and worked and nurtured me in a way that I don't think any workplace ever will. And maybe yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Shout out to Epworth.
And especially to the Medical Foundation, the amount of kind of support they give the staff through the scholarship and philanthropy program is absolutely exceptional. And if we
Yep.
have time, I can talk about the scholarship and what I was able to learn, because the scholarship program and what I was able to do through that actually changed my lens in terms of technology and predictive analytics. Actually, it was one of the things that kind of opened up some of my thinking about this stuff, and human-centered design processes.
Mm,
Anyway, so through that, I
mm,
kind of decided,
mm.
I'm going to do this thing. And people had always said, you're ripe for consulting because I've got such deep expertise. And I'm also what I like to call a high level generalist, right? Because I've had my role went over so many things. And so I thought, you know what, let's just do it. This is the time. And the aim of my business, and it might sound really one, generic, and two, corny, but here we are, is I just really wanted to
Mm.
deliver impact to the community. It was kind of real simple, not very well defined in that way. So
Yep.
just what you want when you go out in your own business as a strategy person. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a good why.
And
It's a
also,
great why.
like I have really significant IP in my head because I have, I call it like my kind of like, my special sauce, right? Which is that I have a very unique kind of, I guess, triple threat, the other thing I call it, which is I've got a clinical background, I've got an operational background, and I've got a strategy background, all of which is overlaid with kind of, I've been
Yep.
working in an executive function. And so I've got a really significant kind of, deep expertise in healthcare. And because I've been across not for profit,
Mm.
public, and private, and I work now and have for a while, I then do third party partnerships in industry with entrepreneurs. So I've got lots of different parts of the story, I guess, of the health ecosystem. Plus, I've got this deep love for technology and design processes. So I've got lots of parts of the system kind of up in my head. And so my ability to kind of go in and talk to people, and I talk often about being a translator. So I'm able really easily to translate concepts from, board to C-suite, C-suite to middle management to frontline. And that's a really useful tool when you're
Yeah.
trying to both conceptually sell, IT adoption stories or, change management things. I do executive coaching as well, which is actually a huge passion of mine because I love the privilege of people letting you into their life and their story and helping them get to where they wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So because I'm kind of this high level generalist, I become very adaptable. And as I said, I like being in the grey. So it's really easy for me to just be stood up and thrown around kind of thing in that way. So
Yeah.
the consultancy kind of
Yeah.
allows me to not have to, in some ways, define myself, which is really useful for me, but can be a bit uncomfortable in the Australian marketplace, right? Because America's a lot better at it. America is probably a lot more ahead of us with the ways of working and these new ways of working. And so you'll see often in America, there's a lot more roles and functions for consultants, which would be these kind of high level generalists, or, even if you think about job functions, chief of staff roles are much greater in the functionality. And if you look in the marketplace, and they do exist in Australia, clearly, but they're a lot bigger out there in the world in America. And that's the kind of function that I am, right? Because I can do the stakeholder management, I can do the HR functions, I can do the brand management, I can do the strategy piece, I can, I can go across all functions, right? And so that's what I get to offer in my consultancy is, what do you need? Let's do it and let's problem solve it together. So now I get to kind of play with whoever wants to play with me, and I love that.
We'll be right back after this short break. Yeah, and I love your drive behind it, Maya. And I think it's a great why. Like I said, any sort of good impact to the community is something I would support at any time. But what do you think are the priorities or the things that you want to focus on?
I have this idea about how we can amplify what I call user-generated content in health design. And I think that AI is going to be the solution to this. So at the moment, if we think about how decentralized information is across just all of the internet, and this isn't specific
That's
only to
Yep,
health, but clearly I have a fascination with health, so we'll talk
that's right.
about that.
Yeah,
I want to bring kind of all of the voices together. And so, clearly I come from a clinical background. So fundamentally, I'm very good at reading clinical information. And I think hospitals and other care providers have become much more nuanced at understanding health literacy has to be able to be accessed to people for all reading levels, and it has to be formatted in ways which isn't just around words. It has to be visual, and that's been yeah,
different
exactly. For people from
languages.
non-English
Yeah,
speaking backgrounds, I mean, I say English because we're in Australia, which is the predominant language.
yeah,
So that's a journey that all of the services are kind of been on. We still have a long way to go, but the part that we're starting to get better is how do we bring in what we call the patient voice, right? So we do that by doing co-design processes. We do it by having lived experience as part of it. I'm someone who's not going to talk on behalf of the lived experience and lived expertise community because that's their own voice to talk of. But what I do is I talk about system design and service design. So what I want to do is use AI as a tool to bring in all of the decentralized knowledge. And so I have an obsession, and it's one of my other favorite soapboxes, with TikTok in particular. And I fundamentally believe it's one of the best democratizers of education and information, probably in our lifetime. And that's a controversial soundbite, and it's nuanced, yeah. But I'm not going to get into the nuance of it. We don't have time. But
yep, yeah,
clearly the internet is great. Clearly
yeah,
AI is going to be great. So take that with a grain of salt. But for this context, I'm just going to use that. So one of the things I talk about
yeah,
is that we need to meet our patient populations, our consumers, us as end users, because we're part of the health system. We have to meet people where they are. So when we think about traditional legacy systems of these hospitals and healthcare providers, we have this expectation of this top-down kind of power process, right? Where we are the institution or the healthcare provider, we sit here, you come to us, or, we interact in this kind of transactional way. And so what I want to do is flip that a little bit and kind of go, you know what if we started to meet people actually where they were? So we're already starting to see that in terms of the models of care, where we're moving towards community-based models of care. We're moving towards hospital in the home, rehab in the home, all the services that, you know, I've provided historically, both as a clinician and as, you know, someone in charge of those services. And I love that. The community loves it. Everyone, providers love it. So I kind of go, why aren't we doing the same thing with health information and you know, communication? So I know, and you probably know, if you're in a local Facebook group, you've probably seen on that local Facebook group someone in good faith ask the question, does anyone know of a local GP that I can see? Or does anyone have a specialist that, you know, is good with blah, blah, blah? Or someone has gone on in a comment section of a different social media and said, oh, you know, I had this really good or this really bad experience with this product or this thing, or it gave me a headache, or this exercise has been really good, whatever. So what I'm describing is all this decentralized health related information. And then you can also scroll on TikTok like I do and have people tell these great stories. So I kind of what I want to do is have whether it be an AI agent or whether it be a product of some type that essentially allows us to, you know, if I'm asking an inquiry about, oh, I really want to find this particular kind of, you know, health specialist, or, you know, if I want to find, you know, a solution to the fact that I'm really struggling to sleep at the moment, if I put in this inquiry, what essentially will happen is it's going to come up and it's going to trawl through and it's going to bring lots of information to me. So this agent or whatever is going to actually understand my preferences, because Maya really enjoys multifactorial kind of information processing, because I am someone who enjoys stuff from the Mayo Clinic. I am someone who enjoys stuff from Queensland Health. But you know what I also really like? I love a great Spotify playlist to help me fall asleep, or a podcast. I also really like that, to capture that story from that person on TikTok who's talking about, you know, it's a grandparent who said, you know, when I was a parent, my child fell asleep really well when I used to, you know, soothe them with this, 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 and this. And then there's that other person on YouTube who's telling their story. So what it'll do is essentially collate lots of different sources of information so that we start to actually kind of nuance and weave together the fabric of health information, where we actually start to, you know, bring together expert knowledge, which is really important because, you know, it's really valid and it's important, but we also start to bring together the core knowledge of what I call this user-generated knowledge. And, you know, to acknowledge that is lived experience, but it's lived experience and lived expertise, and it's also just all of us as kind of the end users of our health system coming together. So that's what I'm kind of excited about and I'm hopeful for. I'm actually in an accelerator program at the moment working on this, so stay tuned. It may go somewhere, it may not, so no pressure. So I got into since we spoke last, I've got a spot in a scholarship program through the federal government to look into this. So we'll see if anything happens.
That's great news in such a short period of time as well. I was thinking of something when you were talking about that just now, and this is from kind of the technology company side, right? Me. And this is a bit of a prickly
Might be
thing.
the other side of my product. There's another part to this product, so I hope it's about to be what you're talking about.
So when people go and troll the internet themselves looking for advice and whatnot, and they, you know, we all do it. We take people's opinions and reviews, then we form an opinion and make a decision. Essentially, that's what we're doing, right? We're getting all this information to make a decision. Now, if these agents, which let's say are developed by a company like myself, take all of this information, sanitize it, align it, or look at Maya's personality type, characteristics, her favorite Spotify playlist, all of that sort of stuff. And then I provide, and then the agent says, here you go. This is what we think based on all of that. And then you make a decision on that. And there's an adverse or negative outcome. Now, if I did that myself, I'd go, oh, my fault. I didn't do it. But if a solution that I've developed, that I've given you and you've used it, and something,
like,
you know where I'm going with this?
Risk and liability, one of my favorite things to talk about.
Where does the risk and liability?
Well, I mean, the kind of the cheeky part of me goes, well, it doesn't seem to be a problem for Meta or Alphabet with their algorithms and the hate that they're able to kind of free speech, right? Yeah,
and
correct, right? And so
get
I think
away
this is
with.
part of the
Yeah,
dilemma with what
yeah,
all the
yeah,
governments and the EU are trying to understand at the moment, which is actually if we're just talking algorithms at the moment, regulatory kind of response is we don't have a problem with that, right? In the kind of free marketplace. If we're talking about it in terms of, what it would look like with AI, and this is what's interesting, is that the government seem to have a different perspective on algorithms versus AI, even though seemingly those are actually the same thing, right? So they're targeting it differently. No, and I think that's an important thing to call out,
yeah,
right? Which is that there's an overreach going
yes,
in particular things. It's the same. We're seeing it in social media in the same way, right? Where the governments, in particular in Australia, are particularly looking at some, social media things, but aren't looking at, say, kids playing Roblox, right? So if we're looking at kind of risk
yeah,
ratings,
yeah,
I'd be sweeping up a whole heap of those kind of online games as well as the social medias for that age group, right? So I think we've got to call out, and this is
yeah, yeah,
again, this goes to the dialectics of things as to why these things are occurring and, the context of why these things happen. So what I talk about is two approaches. One is that I come again, and I have a lot of the modelling that I do around these approaches to technology adoption and design and service design is based on kind of my clinical frameworks. And so I go with kind of drug and alcohol kind of for this stuff, which is that I go for harm minimisation and not prohibition, which is the general framework for drug and alcohol, right? So one thing for me is we should be talking about digital literacy, right? Which is my approach to all things around online. So one is we should be working with people and our communities to improve digital literacy, which is about how do we engage with online information and content so people can understand the outcomes
yep,
of that. So how is it that people understand what is good
yep,
sources of information versus bad, and that's around misinformation and other things. And so
yep,
people are going to kind of engage with online content regardless. So what I kind of describe is
yep,
one, let's work with people and our communities to engage and improve their online digital literacy, so that when they do engage with your product, my product, whether I make one or not, or just content on Google, that they're able to do that in a more meaningful way. I think that the other thing I describe is they're
yep,
going to be there anyway, right? So there's a reason that we have the phrase Dr. Google, right? Which is that people are on there doing it. So what
yes,
I then
yes,
say to organisations is,
yeah,
so based on that principle of harm minimisation, let's get people and let's work with people to help them understand how to read things kind of in a way that's safer for them. Do you want to be there
yep,
at the front line with them and meet them where they are? Or do you want them to just be kind of swimming around in this information mess regardless? Because they're going to go out and they're going to do that information anyway, right? So my
anyway,
preference
exactly,
is be
yeah,
there with your health information, high quality, that you can put your own guardrails around, because why wouldn't you want to be there and meet your
yep,
consumers, your patients, your end users? You want to be there with them. Don't pretend it's not happening, because we know that, and this is my point around, and that's why I think it's really important to conceptualize it as prohibition, right? We know if you think about alcohol prohibition in the kind of Great Gatsby era, it does not work. We're going through it at
yep,
the moment. The
yep,
kind of the tobacco shop wars. Prohibition doesn't work, right? So I
yep,
just think like we kind of have to
yep,
step out of this worry about what happens if. It's like it's happening anyway, right? And I think, and when we talk about
yep,
why is healthcare less likely, or why is any industry less likely to adopt the evolution of opportunity of technology, that's the why, because we're always so risk adverse. And I go, risk
yep,
risk doesn't stop us from taking bold opportunities of adoption. Risk should allow us to understand frameworks of mitigation, and I think that's the difference, right? And I think the other thing is to consider, why is it that people like potentially you or I, and I don't think it's the you and I, to be clear, but why is it that smaller operators are potentially targeted more and excluded from the marketplace, when greater operators who have far greater reach and algorithms are able to let their algorithms do a whole heap more that are actually the exact same use case? So I
yep,
go, let's concentrate the conversation
yep,
or deflect it onto why they're able to have algorithms that are able to generate a whole heap of content that is far more harmful let's
Yep.
worry, let other
Yep.
people worry about them, and let's use our content and our generation, whether it be AI or our algorithms, to do really positive things for our community. Because I think, the one point we haven't really spoken about yet, but the reason I'm so passionate about this is that our healthcare system has to change. It is not sustainable, and it is
Mm.
does not have fair access and equity at the moment. And that for me is not acceptable. And the thing for me is, healthcare is a human right issue, right? At a core level.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
if I think about
That's
the
right.
real opportunity from a real kind of like, blue sky kind of idea, healthcare is going to be, and AI adoption in healthcare, and just digital technology adoption, low code apps, everything, this is going to be for us the thing that absolutely makes our healthcare system sustainable. Like in thinking about Victoria and Australia, our public health system's probably in the worst case it's been financially in 30 years. Private hospital operators probably the worst it's been in 15 years. Government is really,
Mm.
at a state
Mm.
level is also, paring back spending. And none of that's a criticism of that. It's just showing these tension points mean we have to start doing things differently. And there's this really great quote by
Yep.
this woman, Rear Admiral, I think Grace Hopper, is her name. She was around, I think, in the 40s and 50s. She was a program software designer for the Navy in America. And she said, the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, "We've always done it this way." And I go, now
Mm.
is not the
Mm.
time, right? Because
Yep.
if we do not start redesigning and reconceptualizing our healthcare systems and services, a lot of them will not be here in the next 3 years. And that scares me as someone who
Yep.
just wants to multiply or offer the opportunity for people to get access to services. So if we think about how remote healthcare, monitoring, or AI, or all of the kind of wearables and all the technology, and how do we do kind of, even the operation side of, booking of, your services, which I love. That's my favorite use case as an ops person. How are we going to
Yep.
be able to do
Yeah.
that so that remote and rural communities can get access to specialist care, and just the thousands of preventative things, due to climate change? There's just so many use cases. I go, this is why we have to have these conversations.
Absolutely. No. And this is why I've got you on. I want to get this. I want to get you out there. I want to get your vision, this wonderful thing that you want to
Thank you.
do out there to as many people as possible, to give you the support that you need, to give you the encouragement as well, because we need more and more people like yourself who want to change a system that's so important
Yeah,
to
thank
our
you.
community. Um, yeah, so definitely we could speak a
Yeah,
lot more about this. But uh, in winding up, I ask all my guests this: what's the coolest or weirdest application of AI you've seen or
you'd like to
would
see.
like to see? It doesn't have to be in your sector, but yeah,
Now, I
could
know
be
I've already
anything.
mentioned it, and I know that it's one that's out there, but I'm going to use it to highlight why. Kind of, I'm going to go with it. It's kind of a bit of a cheat, but it's an algorithm based one, and it is going to
Yeah,
be TikTok. And I'm going to use it because it's a really good use case in terms of
yeah,
health. So this is why I think these things are so
yeah.
powerful. So this is a story of a woman whose child had a really weird medical presentation, right? And he had some odd symptoms. She couldn't quite work it out, was seeing lots of doctors, couldn't work it out, and started talking about it on her TikTok channel. And a lot of people kept saying to her, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And she kept checking and it didn't quite fit any of the symptomology. And, as per America, she had
Mm,
by the time she was able to see a doctor, it was going to be kind of 4 or 6 months. Anyway, and then she had one woman who messaged her and said, listen, I think your child has what my child has. And then perchance the woman who messaged her's mother or something said, I think you've got what my grandchild has. And she was like, da, 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 da. Anyway, by the time she went
mm.
to see the I think pediatric geneticist or whatever, she said they were going to do a suite of blood tests, did the blood tests, and she said, I think you should also do this one particular blood test for this one very random, like very specific genetic disorder, right?
Mm,
And they said, why do you think that? And she said, I know
mm,
this sounds
mm.
weird, but there are these 3 people or whatever that contacted me through TikTok and da 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 da. Anyway, they do the suite of
Yeah,
genetic
yeah.
testing. Results come back, and the child has that one genetic test that one other family messaged this woman about. And it's something like,
Wow. Wow.
600 people in the world have this genetic condition, right? And I go, this is the power of
Yeah. Yeah.
amplification
This
of
is,
the voice,
yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
go, and I think about
Yeah.
these things because one, how amazing that this person's been on this journey trying to unravel their child's, experience of kind of unwellness while waiting, because access is an issue, not just in America, but for everyone. And then to have that validated, and it doesn't always go that way. There's a lot of, as we know, cases that go the opposite way where people are giving you a whole heap of garbage information. But I just think like these are the things as to why technology is amazing, and why, even though we can be critical about TikTok and all the bad things that all of the bad social medias go, being
That's right.
training your
That's,
algorithm, like training an LLM,
yep.
we've got to train these
Yep.
models to have really good content to bring you good stuff. And
Yeah.
this is why I'm really hopeful for these things. So yeah, that's my one.
Yeah. And that's a great one. And I know we give social media a bad rap,
Yeah.
because I think that there is, people like to
And we have
focus
to acknowledge it has a
on
very toxic
the
side as
bad
well. Yeah.
side.
I don't want to be the person
Yeah,
that like it's only
exactly.
good. Yeah. Like I'm
Yeah.
explicit that there's some terrible stuff
Yeah.
that happens there. It's predatory.
Yeah.
It's all of that. I want to be clear that that happens as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's
Yeah,
also some very
exactly.
good things that come out of it,
Yeah. Great.
like this. Hey, Maya,
Such a
thank you
pleasure.
so much for your time. It's been great to chat. Yeah, and you
Yes,
and I definitely have to
absolutely.
catch up soon.
And thank you for your time and for the invitation to
Yeah,
be on. It's, yeah, great. I love chatting, as you know. All right.
yeah,
Stay
yeah.
well.
All
Bye.
right, you take care. We'll chat soon. Hey,
Yeah.
just one thing before we go. Some listeners who may have seen you speak, or have met you in person, they may have seen you with like different colored or different glasses rims. And for me, I thought you had hundreds of pairs, like the Elton John of, but 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 show our audience. Well,
Yeah.
sorry, so I have to explain for those who can't see it. Maya have these really cool frames
Yeah.
where it's magnetic and she can take
Now, so
off. Yeah,
I can
and
take the front off so I can change them. But just to clarify, we have,
yeah,
Tony and I had a joke about this, but these are actually relatively brand new. So Tony has seen me previously with different glasses. They weren't as fancy as these. These are new, the
yes,
magnetic ones. But yeah, so you can change the front. I also have
yes,
sunglasses ones, which I forgot to bring in. Sorry. So yeah, so I can change the front. Ooh. And sometimes when I'm getting a bit animated, I do just flick them off in the middle of the meeting. So I can change them, which means that you can kind of just keep the base frames and change the front, which means that it becomes a lot also cheaper. Yeah.
they're very cool. Yes, and they're
Well, now
from
I
what
feel like I
company
shouldn't give
again?
them a
Shout
shout
out to
out
them.
because I said to them that so I
Yeah,
was referring a friend of mine to them, and I said, "Oh, I'll send you the referral code that I've got because it gives the other person a discount." And my referral code had expired, and I emailed them and said, "Hey, my referral code that you guys gave me when I first joined has expired, and can I have another one?" They said, "Yeah, not a problem." And I clicked on it, and it didn't work, so I wrote back to them and I said, "Oh,
and
it's
it
not
still
working."
didn't
And then
work.
they wrote back and they said, "Oh, we're not doing referral codes for Australia." And I was like, And I said, well, I'm
Oh,
actually going on a
oh,
podcast
should we?
and I
Should
think they're
we?
going to want to talk about it. And they said, oh, we're really sorry. So I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't mention your name then. But no, because I'm a lover, not a hater, it's called Pair Eyewear,
Yeah,
Pair. And also because they're entrepreneurial young people, go check them out. And Pair Eyewear, do
yeah.
better. No. And
We
also
help where we
genuinely,
can, right,
I
Maya?
think they're really cool because they're a young startup out of America. They were on Shark Tank, and they saw, as we love,
Yeah,
I'm a designer, of systems, and they saw a problem in the marketplace, which is why would you have all this consumption issue of people buying new glasses all the time when you can just, really replace the front.
yeah. It's
So
just
I'm
change.
joking about,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't joking about that story. That is what happened. But yeah, I do love people who see really, opportunities in the marketplace to design and do better. So shout out to Pair Eyewear.
Yes, definitely.